So now that a student has actually submitted their work on Nurture for me, the next step is how we actually provide feedback on Nurture. And in this video, I'm going to show you a couple of things. I'm going to show you how to, first of all, provide personal feedback for an individual student. I will also show you then how to create group feedback or group level feedback or learning outcome feedback for all of your students in one go. And this is the key to saving time within Nurture, is being able to group your students by learning objectives so that you only have to, give the one feedback comment once. Okay, so that's the two main things I want to cover in this video. I might touch on a couple of other points, but throughout I'm also going to show you how you can leverage the Nurture Assistant to speed up your workflow and make giving feedback much faster for you. So I'm back into Nurture here as the teacher, and I'm on this is just the home screen. I can see here the engagement score has gone up to 10. That's just because one student out of the 10 students in this class has a 100% engagement score, so that's why it's sitting at 10 for the whole class. If I go into that one student, which was Shane Little, I believe, we can see that has an engagement score of 100. So the all students is essentially just the average of all students once they've submitted their work. So, and we can see just a couple of basics thing here. I'll cover this in more detail in a separate video, okay? But the individual assessment then, if I click into the assessment, I'm back on the assessment screen. We can see here that Shane has given me the confidence score. We don't have a grade for them yet because we haven't graded this. The student is pending review, so this means that their work is pending a review from us. And then below here is the learning outcomes feedback. So first of all, I'm going to show you how this works for an individual student. Okay, now ideally you would have a confidence score from all of your students at this point, but just for this demo I only have it from one. But you can, regardless of whether a student has given you their confidence score or not, or regardless of even if they've submitted any work to you or not, you can actually still give them feedback that they can close out the feedback loop with. Okay, so for Shane Little, first thing I do is just the personal feedback for an individual student. So I'll click review on Shane's work, and this will come out from the side here. Now we can see that his confidence is low. This is the comment that they had. So you'll see in the previous tutorial I wrote down this. So this assessment took me an hour and I found it difficult. An important point to note: feedback obviously has not been published to this student just yet. Because I select papers, because I selected, when I set up this assessment, I set this for paper submissions, okay? This allows, obviously, students to hand up their work in class to you, and if they want, they can go back and they can go into Nurture and just give you their confidence score. But let's say, for instance, that the student went on to Nurture, gave you a confidence level and gave you a comment just to increase their engagement score on the app. But let's say they actually never gave you any work, okay? Well, this is just a simple fail-safe for you as a teacher. And if you just tick this, you can just mark it that the student actually did not submit any work for this assessment. And what this does is this will just cancel out any increase in engagement score that the student might receive by just chancing giving you their confidence level and their student comments if they haven't actually done the assessment. Okay, so that's just a simple fail-safe for you. Now I'm just going to untick this because the student did give me work in this instance, and the student actually uploaded it as an attachment here. So as a teacher I can just download this if I want, and if you want to use your own annotation software, this is quite useful. But if I click open, this will just open up the attachment here. It might take a few seconds to load up, but this is the student's work, okay? And they've obviously submitted this as a Word document. If they've uploaded it as multiple photos, you are going to have to open each one individually. But on this document, I can zoom in, and you can use the various tools on our own annotations tool to work with it. You can use it to highlight things. You can add a comment, I believe, which is somewhere here, comments. So that is just a highlight. You can basically you can add different forms of annotations here. I'm not going to go through this annotation tool in detail because that is not the core of what Nurture does. That is just an additional tool that you have, right? But that's just the actual student's work. But where the actual Nurture part of this comes in is I now have to say what learning objectives the student actually needs feedback on. Okay, So if, let's say, Shane had issue with this learning objective, the first one and the third one, I would just simply click this and click this. But let's say they did okay with this second one, they don't really need feedback on this second one, just the first two. I'll highlight both of those. Okay, so these are the two learning outcomes that the student needs feedback on. Next then, for the personal feedback, I'll have to give them a mark. So I'll say the student got 12 out of 20. Now, if grading has been turned off, obviously this will not be here. And if this is rubrics, I'm actually going to cover this in a separate video just for anyone specifically using rubrics. All you have to do is select where on the rubric the student landed, and I'll do a short separate video on this, okay? But where you can actually speed up your workflow in terms of generating a personal comment is I can actually use the Nurture Assistant at this point, okay? And if I click I think if I click suggest comment, and let's say I want to encourage the student, okay, or they need improvement. Let's say they know they didn't do a good job and they do need improvement. Or let's say if a student thought they did quite well but they actually did much better than they thought, maybe I might encourage them. Now obviously if they did brilliantly and they know that, then you might say well done. But in this instance I'm just going to say they need improvement, okay? Now what this is going to do, I'm just going to scroll back up, is the Nurture Assistant is going to factor in that the student needs help with this learning objective and this learning objective, but not on this one, okay? And it's going to generate a personal comment based off that. So you can see here it's actually created a comment. So I'm just going to click use suggestion for now just to put it in here. But if it's not useful, you can always retry it. But if it is useful, then just click use suggestion. Remember, you can also let us know whether this was useful or not, just with a simple thumbs up or thumbs down. That will just let us, the Nurture team, know if something is useful and will help the Nurture Assistant to become better over time. So I've added this, I've used the suggestion, so it's added in here. So it says, hey Shane, I hope you're doing well. I noticed that you scored lower than you were hoping on your recent assessment. Don't worry though, I'm here to help. It seems like you may need some more clarity on identifying the key events that led to the division of Germany and the Sovietization of Eastern Europe, as well as describing the emergence of reform movements in Eastern Europe and the collapse of the Soviet Union. So we can see here that has pulled that comment directly in from the fact that we know the student needs feedback on this and this, but not on the middle one. Now obviously if you selected all of them, it'll probably highlight all of them. It just says, let's work together to make sure you have a better understanding of these concepts. Feel free to reach out to me if you need any assistance. You got this. So that's just generated a personal comment within seconds that you can give to the student. Okay, now you don't have to use this. You can also adjust, you can edit this at any point. Let's say if the tone isn't exactly there, you can always change this. But you can see in seconds it's created a personal comment, which most teachers have found very helpful within their first experience of Nurture. Okay, now you will notice I'm not actually going to go into too many specifics here on the learning objectives. It's more just calling out that the student needs help with this. If there's something very specific to that one student that they got wrong, then maybe I might mention it here in the personal comments, but I'm not going deeper on the feedback of what they need to do better on these learning objectives, and there's a good reason for that. That's because I will address these in the group level feedback after, okay? So that is the individual students. So just to recap before I save this, and also the Nurture Assistant has factored in their confidence score. So I noticed that you scored lower than you were hoping your assessment. I think it should factor in their confidence score as well. So just to recap, we've got their work. If it's a paper submission and they actually didn't submit their work, there's a fail safe here for you on that. Obviously the actual work that they have, we can open it or download it. Then to actually review the students' work, we highlight the objectives that they need feedback on, and we give them a grade or their marks, and we can use the Nurture Assistant to create a personal comment based off of what we know they need feedback on. Okay, now you can also add attachments at this point if you want to add attachments specific to that student. Some teachers find that maybe they want to add a little voice note for that individual student if they like, but you don't have to at this point. Okay, but it is quite useful. So what I need to do next is I need to click mark as reviewed. and now this submission has been marked as reviewed. Now the feedback has not yet gone to the student, and you can see that here it's still not been published. That's because we still need to do our group level feedback. I'll show you that in a moment. But once the student has, after they do get their feedback and they reflect on it, that student reflection is going to appear here, and I'm going to cover that in a later video. So once I have one student done, I can just simply move on to the next student, which is Sophia. Now Sophia hasn't given me any work here, but I'm just going to quickly go through all these students and just to build this up so it looks accurate for you. Okay, so I've actually just gone through every single student and reviewed their work just for the purpose of this demo. And you can see here now that this grade, or this table, has now updated. So we now have their actual grades. So I've given a mark to each of these students. I've obviously reviewed them. We don't have the confidence for all of them, but that's just for the purpose of this demo. In your real class, you should have confidence for most of your students if they submit their confidence score for you. But interesting, now we can see these objectives. So anyone that is green is an objective that the student did well on. Anything in orange is one that they need help with. Okay. And you can always go back in and review the actual, review the feedback that you've given for this student. But the next step is the learning outcomes feedback. And I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom here because this is the final step we need to do before we actually publish this to our students. Okay. And what we have to do, and this is where the time saving comes in. So rather than actually addressing the feedback with the student in their personal comment, you just say, this is what you need help on. By giving group level feedback, this allows you to just give feedback on the learning objective once to all students, and that saves you having to copy and paste the same feedback comment over and over and over again for students. Okay, so with the learning outcomes, then we've got our 3 learning outcomes, and we can see this list here is a list of students that need feedback on it. Okay, so as we're building up this list of where students lie, you can see clearly that this first learning objective is the one that the majority of students struggle with, and then this third one only a handful of students struggle with. So this helps you build a much better picture and understanding of the outcomes or the topics on the assessment that students struggle with the most. Okay, now you can give feedback on all of them, or you don't actually have to give feedback on any of them. You technically could publish this feedback right away, but to give learning outcome feedback, or group level feedback, you might hear me call it, what I'll do is I'll just click give feedback, and we can see here that this is the actual learning objective. Then these students will receive this feedback. Okay, so we got 3 questions here. Well, 2 questions, and then we've got an optional one here for general feedback. These are all still optional. So first one is, how did the students do and how was their process? So here you actually explain how the students did, what their process was like, how well or badly the students kind of completed this learning objective. Okay, but probably the more useful one then is, what are the next steps? So this is where you might explain what the students need to do in order to improve this learning objective. Let's say if there was a common mistake that students made, this is your opportunity to essentially say, this is what they should avoid doing the next time that they come across this in an assessment. Okay. Now, the Nurture Assistant is available at this point to use to suggest comments here. The one thing I will say is we haven't found it to be as useful at this point as it is with personal comments or with creating assessments, but do feel free to use it if you like using the Nurture AI for creating yourself creating a good starting point. But essentially, with all these learning outcomes, we just answer, how did the students do and how was their process, and what are the next steps. Okay. There is a third section here for any general feedback. If there's anything that doesn't exactly fit into these 2 questions that you want to address, you can add that here. If you've got any attachments that you want these students to be able to see, rather than attaching them to the individual student submission or their individual student feedback, you're going to just upload them here once and the students will receive that. Okay. But once I'm happy with the learning objective feedback that I have here, I'm actually just going to use the AI just to suggest a quick comment for this, just to fill it in, so I can show you what that looks like on the student side. I'll just use these suggestions. Then once we have the feedback for this learning objective created, obviously I can add an attachment, and I will here just to show you what that looks like as well. I can use this one. Click upload. Just click create feedback. And now that feedback has been created with one attachment. I can always go back and edit it if I like, but that has been created. If I do edit anything, I just need to make sure I click update it so it updates. Now I'll do the same for the other two learning objectives, and I'll just come back to you after. Okay, now I have created all the feedback for all of these learning objectives, and I'm happy, or learning outcomes. Now the language might be different depending on your school, but once I've created this feedback for all of these and I'm happy with everything, just want to recap. I'm happy with all of the individual student feedback I've given and all the personal comments and the grade, and I'm happy with obviously these group level feedback pieces that will only go to the students that need them, of course. Then last step I need to do is just hit publish feedback. Okay, once I click publish feedback, it's going to ask me how do I want students to reflect on the feedback. Okay, two options here. There is the emoji response and there is the 3-2-1 response. Okay, I would say if this is your first time using Nurture and if it's your students' first time using Nurture, just go with an emoji response. It's the easiest form of reflection. All the students have to do is just answer with an emoji how they felt about the feedback. The 3-2-1 response then is a little bit more detailed. So this is where students have to answer 3 things they learned, 2 things they found interesting, and 1 question they're still left with to unlock their grade. Okay, it's a little bit more work on the student's end, but it gives you a bit more context for the student to reflect. Okay, so for the emoji response, I would always say that's probably the best option to go with if it's your student's first time using Nurture. Okay, so I'm happy with this. I'm happy that it's going to be an emoji response. So I will just click publish feedback. Now feedback has been published, so everything is done. Feedback is done at this point, and this is essentially the end of the tutorial. The last thing that you'll get on all these assessments is whether you want to save this as a template. Okay, so we are going to prompt you to save it as a template if you wish. At this point, you can also save your feedback to the template, the learning objective feedback, so that group level feedback. You can save it. I'm going to cover assessment templates in a separate video, but this will be quite useful for anyone that has published feedback and they want to save that as a template. Let's say they want to be able to reuse this then with other class groups, and I'll cover that in a separate video.